Welcome to the Springs Are Everywhere podcast, a production of SMI, the Spring Manufacturers Institute. I'm your host, Gary McCoy, Executive Director of SMI. Our podcast highlights important issues facing manufacturers and gives you a brief glimpse of products that contain springs. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate us, and like us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast. This edition will highlight how to achieve success working with a multi-generational workforce and how to create an awesome company culture. We'll first talk with Jeff Butler, an author and workplace strategist, on how different cultures and employees can successfully interact with each other. In our second segment, we'll chat with Dyer, a trailblazer in leadership, company culture, and business growth. He'll talk about the key ingredients to create an amazing company culture. The Springs Are Everywhere podcast is brought to you in part by our platinum sponsor, Gibbs Interwire. I want to welcome Jeff Butler to the Springs Are Everywhere podcast. Jeff is an author and workplace strategist who explores human behavior within the working world. His experience spans over 40 industries and 4 continents on how different cultures and employees interact with each other. He studies common threads of behavior in industries such as IT professionals, underground utility workers, police officers, to clothing retail chains. In addition, Jeff has also worked with companies like Google, Amazon, John Dyer, and Coldwell Banker. As a researcher and practitioner, he also runs a consulting company and a tech company, Trinity Fix, where he's able to test his ideas in different workplace environments. His ideas have made it to TEDx twice. He's appeared in dozens of media outlets, and he's written 2 books on human behavior: The Authentic Workplace and The Key to the New You. Jeff will be joining SMI at our annual meeting in New Orleans at the end of March. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Well, Jeff, your presentation to our group is called Building an Effective Multi-Generational Workforce. Can you give us a preview of what you'll be talking about?
There's 2 main ideas that I'm trying to drive home here that hopefully attendees can take away. First is, how do you get individuals who are different to put a set of differences and work together effectively? That's the first thing. The second is, how do you capitalize on those differences? Because many people criticize, well, this generation that generation this. But if you can actually look at it at a different lens, where if you have a variety of different perspectives, you can leverage that in some capacity. Because if you have a homogeneous perspective base, you only have one solution to fix something. But if you have multiple, at least you have different options. So those are the 2 main things that I want to convey in our short time together in New Orleans.
So, Jeff, I think it's pretty safe to say a lot of companies have 4 different generations, all the way from the baby boomers down to Gen X. And how do you get those all to work together in a cohesive fashion?
I think the question, instead of asking, can you get different generations to work together effectively? If you look at it more broadly, it's how do you get people who are different to work together effectively is a much more straightforward question to solve. And you start getting more away from different group preferences and more of what works here. Because very often people would say, and this happened at a manufacturing plant that I got to visit that put together the cockpits for F-15 fighter pilots. They had a younger generation who did not want to go by OSHA requirements, and they wanted to wear headphones while they did certain work. There's a reason why that's in place, and they lost a lot of talent for that. But the piece is, there's a hard line of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So for the first thing, if you're going to look at how to get different people to work together effectively, which is possible, which I see consistently in many different organizations, the first thing you need to look at is what here is negotiable and what here simply cannot change. Once you answer those 2 questions, it becomes a lot easier to say, okay, is this employee who we're interviewing a fit or not a fit for our criteria?
So I got to believe there's going to be conflict that happens at times. What are some strategies to help overcome that?
We got to look at the research for this because many people, when they think of generation, say, oh, but your generation might want to get texted a problem. It's like, well, no. People haven't evolved that much differently in the past, 20 years. Relatively similar, even though we seem like we're different species or whatnot. But here's the thing. If you look at the research, even the way we vote with our feet, with our dollars, people choose to go to the conference in person. They have an option of virtual, but the thing is the conference does not allow that at this point. I mean, during COVID, that was the case, but now that's not the case. But so people still pay thousands of dollars to fly all the way to the conference. Why am I bringing this up? Because when you have a conflict between employees, instead of sending an email which just has the content or a phone call, just tonality, the more modalities you can pick between your body language, the content of what you're saying, the tonality of your voice, the more likely you'll be in better sync with someone. Hence, if you have a disagreement with another person, probably best not to send them a message. Probably best to use more of those modalities depending on the severity of that issue. And I like to bring up at the conference, I actually talk about that specifically and say, look, we're here. We had the option of being all remote. It's cheaper that way. But why do vendors and people who buy booths spend thousands and thousands of dollars and tie away their families to be here at the conference? Because it makes money for them. Because they can build those relationships. And if that didn't work, they will not go to the conference. The same thing applies when you're trying to resolve conflict with people, especially between different groups.
Very good. And Jeff, I think a lot of work has been done in manufacturing to help attract young people to the industry. And I'm talking about the millennials, Gen Z. What are some things that company leaders can do to help enhance the environment that would make them want to come work for them?
Goes back to my original question: what's negotiable versus not negotiable? There's that piece. If there's some area where you can have something that doesn't apply for OSHA, that they can use headphones or something of that nature, fine, you can go that route. However, I would say this is not on the presentation. This is just something I have addressed for other manufacturing groups. If you look at the reason why someone joins a job, it's for a multitude of different reasons. And what happens a lot of times, if you're not necessarily a quote unquote, I don't give the better word to describe this, but I'll use this word, sexy type of job, a lot of places say we have to play to both sides. We have to play to the side of people who've been there for a while, who are hardened by this environment, who are proud of being here, to an environment also of people who are skeptical about this, who don't want to get their hands dirty, who don't want to be in a loud environment where earplugs all day. Instead of trying to appeal to both parties, lean into that piece. Now, there's polarities to each industry, and manufacturing has its polarities. A big polarity people might argue is that it's not very sexy. But on the opposite side, you would say, well, which areas are getting the most layoffs right now? Oh, the sexy jobs. Okay, well, if you want something that's stable, that's going to pay the bills, that you don't have to worry about next month that the whole place is fired, this might be a place for you. But if you want something that you're going to find out, myself, this actually happened to me. The entire company goes bankrupt because a foreign entity decides to buy them out. Did happen. It was a whole different story I could share on a different podcast. You're better fit for that environment. So I would lean into that piece, because I even talked to different manufacturing plants about AI, and they're like, yeah, it's like way too expensive to work on this. And if there's any sort of customer requirement changes, it's like impossible. Anyways, I would go with that perspective of lean into your polarities versus trying to appeal to everyone.
Yeah, Jeff, there's a lot of, I'll say, tribal knowledge going out the door of a lot of companies because baby boomers are saying, I'm done, I'm retiring. How are companies, getting that information down to the, younger folks and making sure that that stuff is retained?
To start those conversations, both sides of the aisle need to make an adjustment, which I call the catch-22 of cooperation. One side, which is baby boomers who are leavy, they have experience, they know, as I say in the vernacular, they know what's up. That group needs to also realize, since the world constantly changes, even though they have confidence of 30 years behind them, they still need to have a sense of openness because the world changed. If it did not change that much, they can continue with that level of confidence and being closed off to new ideas. But since it changes a lot, you still need to keep that malleability, which is contradictory to building confidence. So that's the first piece. The second piece is people who have less experience, having that group understand you don't know what you don't know. And that's okay. It takes experience to know. There's a reason why someone gets a title, and you probably won't know until you have that title.
Very good. Jeff, anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I hope, though, from the session that when you walk away, you no longer see a diverse group of ages as a weakness, but rather a strength. And if we're going to work together effectively, it's better to look at what we have in common, where we can actually help each other, than our individual differences. So I think we need to come together because at the end of the day, we all just want to earn money, take care of our loved ones. And so let's just keep it that way and make sure we look at a place we want to be at.
Working together. What a great theme.
I know. Yeah. It's very topical.
Thanks for your time today. And if people want to read a little bit more about you, how would they get in touch with you?
You could just type in my first and last name and speaker online, Jeff Butler Speaker. It's a very common name, unfortunately, but I definitely am number one spot if you type in the speaker part. So there's my site, got a couple articles, a couple videos, and you can always reach out to me for individual questions.
Very good. And you're coming to us from Dallas, but I saw that you're originally from California. So we'll be
yeah. It's I don't know how this works, but I from California. But here's a side note: I'm actually in a month going to address the California Firefighters Association. And if you want even crazier odds, I actually addressed the group of police chiefs that was there for the attempted assassination on President Trump.
Wow.
So I don't know what's up with my schedule, but I'm getting like all the craziest types of events and having to address the group afterwards, say, hey, here's how you handle uncertainty. Anyways, should be a fun group. I'm not as nervous for you guys, but yeah, that's what I have coming up next month. So
we'll look forward to having you. And thanks again for your time today.
Appreciate you, Jerry.
Gibbs Interwire, North America's largest spring wire distributor, now offers precision draw, high-performance alloy wire through a partnership with Alloy Specialty Metals. With over 125 alloys, our goal is to deliver exactly what you need, precisely when and where you need it. We're committed to bringing you simpler sourcing with the highest quality results tailored to your requirements. As a longtime supporter of SMI's mission to inform the spring industry, Gibbs Interwire is proud to be the platinum sponsor of the Springs Are Everywhere podcast. For your quote today, call Gibbs Interwire at 800-800-4422 or visit us at gibbswire.com.
It's my pleasure to welcome Chris Dyer to the Springs Are Everywhere podcast. Chris is a celebrated keynote speaker with over 15 years of experience. He specializes in company culture and remote work. As a CEO, his leadership led his companies to be recognized as best workplaces and to be featured on Inc. magazine's fastest growing companies. That happened 5 different times. He's renowned for his expertise. Inc. magazine named him the #1 leadership speaker on culture. He's the author of several best-selling books, including The Power of Company Culture and remote work. His speaking engagements are known for their transformative impact, blending insightful candor, humor, and effective strategies like his 7-pillar strategy, which significantly boosts productivity and performance in many organizations. I'm excited that Chris will be one of the speakers at our SMI annual meeting in New Orleans on April 1st. And Chris, thanks for being part of the program today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to see you.
Chris, back to this idea of the 7 pillars. You're going to be talking about the 7 pillars of amazing culture. Can you give me a little overview of what you're going to be talking about?
Sure. So, to give you a little bit of context, I realized my culture was a bit broken back in 2008. We had a big recession, and I was looking around the room at all my people and saying, "What ideas does everybody have?" And they were all looking at me saying, "What's the idea you want us to go in and execute on?" And I realized I was the idea person and they were all the executors, and that's not a great place to be in business. As the business owner or the CEO, you don't want to be the only person coming up with ideas because, you know, we may have a few every year, but we don't have them all. We really need it to team effort. I had thousands of people I'm managing, and I hadn't created that environment, right, where they understood the business enough to come up with great ideas, felt encouraged, and created that space for them to want to do that. And so I was like, great, we got to change the culture. The next question is, well, what is the right culture? I mean, if you wanted to go buy a new car, you might research a car. You might research all these different types of things you might do. And I kind of felt like there was a bit of a missing answer out there. And yet, when I went and spoke to the top executives in the world that I would go and interview and speak to great, authors and keynote speakers and very, very wealthy and well-to-do people that had multiple businesses do really well, I noticed they were saying these same 7 things to me as the areas where I should really be focusing on. And so I took those 7 and we really made that a part of our ethos at the company. And the moment we did that, right, within 6 months, I mean, we just took off in a way. It was like adding rocket fuel into what we were already doing by just getting really good at these 7 things.
So, Chris, how do companies produce a high performing culture?
Yeah. So to be high performing, you have to be really good at these 7. And so just to kind of give you a quick overview, there's the things like being transparent, measuring what matters, having positive leadership and focusing on what's working first, being good listeners. That's to our employees, to our clients, right? Being listening, celebrating what makes us unique, figuring out, what each person brings to the table and really being able to help them do that really well. Knowing how to leverage mistakes in a positive way and helping create this innovation. And finally, having a great recognition program. So if we can do those things, and ultimately what happens is if you're listening to this, you're saying, well, I'm good at those 2 things, and I'm okay at those 3 things, but maybe those 2 things we're not so good at. And that's really the magic for every company, is to realize what you're not good at right now and go and work on that to kind of add that rocket fuel I mentioned before to your organization.
So, let me ask you, what have you observed that can hold leaders back from creating this healthy company culture?
Yeah, there's a few things. So one is we tend to learn leadership from our parents, from our teachers, from our sports coaches, or music teachers, and those aren't very good role models for being a business leader. I was a sports coach. I was in sports, and I was basically running my team like a sports team for many years, and it didn't really work long term. It was fine when there was 10 of us in an office. When there was 100 and then there was 1,000, maybe it just didn't work. I couldn't send people out to go run around the building 5 times, or they didn't meet their quota, or to go do push-ups. You had to find a different way to motivate people. And so I think there's that leaders don't know what they don't know. So that's one problem. And great leaders go out, they learn, they read, they get exposed to new ideas. And that's one area. But the second area is that they're fearful. They're fearful of making a mistake. They're fearful of sharing too much because what will someone think? What will they say? Can I actually handle all those questions? We used to give, when we became a fully transparent company, we started giving out our P&L to everybody. Every single month, here's our P&L. Here's how now, not the full detail, not every little nook and cranny, but we gave them the summary of like, this is how we made money this month. This is where we spent the money. This is it. We were profitable or not profitable. And within a year, we were 35% more profitable by just sharing that with people because they started coming up with ideas on how we could save money. Or, geez, if that client is really not a profitable client and they are 100 of our tickets this month, maybe they're not a good client for us. Maybe we need to fire them. Right. And so it was really impactful to be able to remove. I was fearful of like, if I show everyone all this stuff, what are they going to think? Are they going to ask for a raise? Or are they going to quit? Or, all of that. So I think those are two really big areas that leaders really struggle with.
So, any pitfalls or roadblocks that can stymie? You've got this new culture changing initiative, things that might say, oh my gosh, this is going to, put some roadblocks up.
Yeah. So inevitably what happens is if you listen to those 7 and you're probably saying, well, maybe we're not so good at measurement. Let's go get better at measurement. And there's a real inherent problem with that. Because if you go and ask people to do all these changes and to do things differently, and you're only getting a small increase, only a small bit of like better culture, then people are kind of like, well, that was a lot of work for just a very small improvement. I always recommend that if you hear those 7 and you say, well, geez, we're really bad at transparency. That's like a big problem. That's where you should go and spend your time and effort, because you make things significantly better for your people. So they're going to go and have to make changes. They're going to have to do things differently, but the change was really helpful. Now people get addicted to that. And they're like, well, what else can we improve? What else can we get better? Because I can see we did a little bit of work here and that really made a huge difference for us. Not, well, we did a whole bunch of work and it was a little bit better and did it really matter? So that's a big pitfall is to avoid, is to not just go grab the low hanging fruit and ask people to do all this work. Go find the big thing that's going to make the big difference.
Is there things leaders can do to assess, what I'm good at and maybe what I need to, work on?
Absolutely. So we were a big proponents of the Gallup Strengths Finders. So I love to go get your 5 strengths, go have your team take that test, have them get their 5 strengths, and then really talk about with your team, the people you work with the most often, this is what I'm really good at. What are you really good at? And then start asking questions like, should we be changing who does what work? I'm really good at ideation. I'm good at getting 100 ideas and telling you this one's good and this one's good. The rest of them are garbage. Let's get rid of those. Somebody else is like, I don't know. I can't figure out which idea we should go with. But once you make the decision, I'm really good at getting the project done. Right. And so knowing our roles and what we're good at can really be helpful. And as a leader, I'll tell you, I went and asked this question early in my 2008, I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I would ask the best of the best, should I worry about my weaknesses? Should I try to get better at them? And they would always tell me yes. And then I would say as a follow-up, but do you do that? And you could see the light bulb in their brain go off and they'd be like, oh no, I actually outsource. Anything I'm not good at, I have other people to do that. I don't spend any time on things that don't give me energy. And it was like, but you just told me I should worry about the things I'm weak. So there's this thing in like society that tells us we're supposed to work on those things that we're weak at. So in business, I highly suggest focusing on what you're really good at, what gives you a lot of great energy, finding other people to be your, yin to your yang, to kind of balance you out, things that you're not good at. That's not such great advice for like your marriage, but for business, it works really, really well.
Oh, good. Hey, I just want to close with one other thought. I know you talk about artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
and it's certainly on the minds of a lot of people that I deal with. So where do you see the AI landscape in businesses right now? And, maybe a little peek into the future.
Sure. So, one of the things that people need to really understand is that the cycles of innovation are changing faster and faster. So, the amount of change that, let's just say, your great grandparents went through, you went through in the last decade. And let that sink in. Like the amount of things they had to think about and learn or do differently in their lifetime of, let's say, 60 to 80 years, I mean, average lifespan, right? You just did in the last 10. And it's going to get faster. So, for a lot of us that, had pagers and then cell phones and then the internet and dial up and then high speed internet and then the internet of things, right? And then all of a sudden now we have AI and the amount of change just keeps going faster. So we have to think about how, as businesses or as leaders or as employees, we're going to be prepared to handle more and more change. That's the first sort of big bucket you've got to get your brain around. The second part is there's probably a lot of people out there who are really, really good at the how. And if you're not one of them, if you're not the person out there figuring out how to use AI, if that's not you, don't try to be that person. Instead, spend your time thinking about what can I do with AI and why is that important? So, because I kind of find that people get stuck and they stumble on the how. They get like, well, okay, I'm ChatGPT. How does this even work? And how can I prompt this? And no, what can I do with this? And get really, really clear. And then somebody else, a consultant, someone on YouTube or on TikTok or whoever can show you the how, or another software will actually come in and do the how for you. AI will actually tell you the how sometimes pretty well. What can you do that's going to be impactful to your business? And why might that be important to your business next year or in the coming years? Those are the questions that you, especially in a leadership role or as an employee, if you're worried that AI might take your job or impact your industry, what can it actually do and why is this going to be important? Those are the things you really should be thinking about.
Chris, a lot of great ideas, and a lot of the wheels hopefully are turning for people, and hopefully they'll show up in New Orleans to hear more and to meet you and ask you maybe some other questions. But in the meantime, how can people reach out to you?
Well, I'm happy to always send people some free resources. So if they want to text to 33777 and just put my name, Chris, in there, I'll send you a free guide on connecting with your people better with meetings and surveys and things like that. Otherwise, I'm on literally every social media platform. So if you hang out on LinkedIn, let's connect. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, whatever it is, I'm there, happy to connect and continue the conversation there.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
In addition to Gibbs Interwire, the Springs Are Everywhere podcast has been made possible by the generous support of our gold sponsor, Pyromite, a manufacturer of high-precision industrial stress-relieving and tempering ovens for spring applications. You can learn more at pyromaitreovens.com. And by our silver sponsor, Automated Industrial Motion. You can learn more at aimcoil.com.
Thanks for joining us for the Springs Are Everywhere podcast. I want to thank our two guests today, Jeff Butler and Chris Dyer. You can learn more about SMI at smihq.org. Be sure to subscribe, rate us, and like us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This program would not be possible without the generous support of our platinum sponsor, Gibbs Interwire, along with our gold sponsor, Pyromite, and our silver sponsor, Automated Industrial Motion.
Did you know that you probably encountered a spring today as you exited the front door of your house? Compression and torsion springs are used for doorknobs and handles. By twisting door handles back into their neutral position after use, these springs play a big role in the care of our homes. Remember, springs are everywhere. and maybe even closer than you thought.